Hi, Venerable.
Hi. Morning.
Good morning. Good evening.
How are things in Singapore?
Yeah, okay, quite okay. Yeah, it's cooler now. Yeah, much better.
Monsoon time?
Yes. So we have a lot more rain, but weather is good because it's cooler. You don't have to turn on the aircon.
Hopeful. Yeah, good.
Yeah. I think it's about time. Maybe we can start.
Okay.
Yeah.
This thing keeps turning fuzzy. Blurry.
Yeah, it's sometimes, yeah. So I'm not too sure why
I
it
think
happens sometimes.
if I move too much, then it gets blurry. So I have to stay still. Little statue.
Maybe it's a computer trying to focus.
I did it
Yeah,
again.
yeah, it happens again. It loses focus.
Yeah, but what I do is I turn it off and on again, and then it's okay.
I'm not sure why it happens. Maybe it is a connection kind of thing, or
No, it happens with other
other Zoom meeting.
yeah. Okay, so I think people are still coming on. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, still trickling in.
Okay, well, we can start. So tonight, or rather today, this morning for you, this is the fourth and final talk of this series I've been giving on the theme of creating peace in a chaotic world. So I've been talking about how we can create peace in our own mind, because that's really the only place we can create peace. Because when it comes to other people and their minds, it's not very likely that we'll be able to change other people's minds. So even people we're close to, like our family members and friends and so on, much less people out there in the world. So maybe you've had the experience of trying to change somebody else's mind. For example, parents, probably many of you are parents, and when you see your children and some of the things that they do and some of the attitudes that they have, you might want to change them. You might think, you don't have a good attitude, you don't have a good behavior, you should change. And so you probably, try to get your children to change in a certain way and to have certain attitudes in their mind. And sometimes this may work, but not always, because children have their own minds. They have their own ideas, their own attitudes, their own karma, we would say, according to Buddhism. Everyone has their own karma. So maybe when your child is very small and they're still very much dependent on you, then they might go along with what you're saying and what you're asking them to do. But then when they grow up and they start to become more independent, maybe they move out and they live on their own. So then they do what they want. So they may not listen to what you say and do what you ask them to do. So maybe as a parent, you've had some experience like that. And also not just with parents and children, but sometimes with our siblings. We might try to change our siblings or our friends or your husband or your wife or your partner, you might think, the way you're doing things isn't really very good. You should do things differently. And maybe you try to do that. You try to get the person to change, but what happens? Sometimes they might listen and they might change, but sometimes not. Sometimes it can even become a cause of conflict, cause of problem between you and the other person, and arguing and so on, and unhappiness. So when it comes to trying to change other people and trying to change the world out there, we may not be very successful. But we shouldn't be discouraged about that, because even the Buddha, he was not able to change the mind of everybody that he met. Even some of his closest disciples, these are monks who lived with the Buddha. They were disciples of the Buddha, very close to him. But sometimes they were rebellious. They didn't do what the Buddha said. Sometimes they got into quarrels with each other, arguments with each other, and just ignored the Buddha's advice. So Buddha couldn't go into their minds and kind of fix their minds, repair their minds like we repair a broken car, It doesn't work like that. The mind is not like a car engine or a computer or a phone that you can, get some tools and open it up and, work on it and get it fixed. So the mind isn't like that. So even the Buddha wasn't able to change the minds of some of his disciples. And in fact, nobody can change another person's mind, even the Buddha. So how should we expect ourselves to be able to do that? So the point I'm trying to make is that if we think, or if we hope that we could change the minds of other people and all the people in the world and get them all to behave nicely and only do good things and not do bad things, and only, behave in a way that brings peace and not in a way that brings problems and suffering. If we have that expectation or that hope or that wish, we're going to be disappointed. It's just not possible. Even the Buddha isn't able to do that. So if you're not a Buddha, I'm not a Buddha. If we're not Buddhas, then it's even less likely that we would be able to change other people. However, we can change our own mind. So that is something we can do. And that's really what Buddhist practice is all about. It's kind of the essence of Buddhism, is working on our own mind in order to bring about a positive transformation, which means decreasing the negative, disturbing aspects of the mind, the things that disturb our peace and bring suffering, so we can work on those, decrease those, and work on increasing the positive aspects of the mind, the ones that bring happiness and peace. So those are things like love and compassion, patience and generosity, and so on. So working on our mind, learning to have more positive aspects, positive states of mind, and less negative states of mind. That's what Buddhist practice is all about. So if we do that, if we work on our mind in that way, then we can be happy and peaceful anywhere we may be, and any time, even when things are going chaotic. Things are chaotic around us. So in the past few talks, I was talking about different ways in which we can have more peace in our minds. And one of the things I talked about was the 4 keys to well-being. 4 keys to well-being that was explained by Dr. Richard Davidson. neuroscientist and meditator. So those four things are resilience, positive outlook, attention, and generosity. So tonight I'll talk about the fourth of those, generosity. And then I'll talk about one other thing that I thought is important to have peace in our mind. But first, I'll just quickly review the first three of those four keys. Some of you may have missed those previous talks. So the first of the four keys is called resilience. And this is not a word that we normally come across in traditional Buddhist teachings. In fact, I only heard about it the first time a few years ago. I read some articles about resilience and how important that is. So it's not a traditional Buddhist term. However, the concept is there, because resilience is, now when we face problems, we face difficulties, we'll probably be upset for a while. We'll have some difficult feelings, difficult experiences for a while, but being able to recover from that fairly quickly. That's the meaning of resilience, the ability to recover from adversity, such as the loss of a loved one or losing a job, or you yourself are diagnosed with some illness, you have to go through some medical treatment. So these are the kind of problems that can happen to us in life. And some people seem to have a natural ability to not be overwhelmed by these problems and be able to stay balanced and positive. And that's the meaning of resilience. But other people, on the other hand, can get very upset, very distressed when they face problems, and they're not very good at managing these problems. So even if we don't have a natural ability to recover from problems, we don't have natural resilience, we can learn, we can develop it, because in Buddhist teachings, there are methods in two areas of the Buddhist teachings. There are methods that address this particular issue. One is in Lojong. Lojong is a Tibetan term, and we translate it as thought transformation or mind training. There's different ways of translating it. So there's a lot of teachings, at least in the Tibetan tradition, about how to do that kind of practice. So the real purpose of Lojong, or thought transformation, is to develop our compassion, love, bodhicitta, altruism, and follow the bodhisattva's path. So it's how to transform our mind from being self-centered and egotistical and so on, to being compassionate and altruistic. But within the Lojong teachings, there's one group of practices which is called transforming adversity into the path, or transforming problems into the path. And it's wonderful, that body of teachings, because it means that when problems happen to us in life, we don't have to become upset. Of course, we probably will get upset, but if we can remember these teachings and use those teachings, then these problems can be used to help us progress along the path. They can help us to have more compassion, more love, practice Tonglen and other kinds of practices. So they can actually be taken into the path, into our spiritual path, our spiritual practice, make progress on the path, get closer to enlightenment. So it's extremely useful since we do have problems in life. So instead of getting down, upset, depressed about the problems, we can use these methods to help us make progress on the path. And then there's another area in the teachings where we find a similar idea, and that is in the perfection of patience, in the teachings on the 6 perfections. So the third perfection is the perfection of patience. And there's 3 kinds of patience. The one kind of patience is how to manage our anger so that we don't get angry and act out anger and so on, but remain patient. But another kind of patience is called the patience of voluntarily accepting suffering. So meaning when a problem happens, some difficulty happens in our life, instead of becoming impatient and maybe depressed and discouraged and so on, we practice using this problem as part of our path. So it's quite difficult. It's quite similar to the teachings in Lojong about transforming difficulties into the path. So anyway, in both of those 2 places of the teachings, there's a lot of different methods or tools that we can use when we face problems to help our mind stay positive and not be overwhelmed by negative thoughts and feelings and attitudes. But also by using these methods, we're actually transforming this problem into something useful for our path, for our spiritual development. So it's a bit like taking garbage, recycling. We take old plastic bottles and paper and so on that people just throw away, and then transform it into something useful, something beneficial. So it's a bit like that. Recycling our problems, transforming them into things that are helpful for our spiritual path, our practice, and our happiness as well. Because when you use these techniques, it's, instead of feeling upset and depressed and worried and maybe self-pitying, you can actually feel joyful, feel positive and joyful. And also create merit, create virtue to get further along the path. So just one example of this kind of method is when you are facing a problem or a difficulty, you think about other people who have a similar problem. And then that way you realize you're not the only person in the world who has a problem like this, but there are other people. There's probably millions of other people, maybe billions of other people who have a similar problem to the one that you're going through. And so in that way you don't feel so alone and isolated and like, oh, I'm the only person in the world who suffers. Everybody else is doing really well. Things are going well for them, and I'm, not going well for me. So these are the kind of thoughts that we sometimes have when we experience problems, and they just make things worse. They don't make us feel better, they make us feel worse. And it's just not true at all. You're not the only person in the world who has a problem. Lots of other people have a problem too. And also, you might realize that some people have even worse problems than you do. And then thinking in that way, your own problem might seem quite small and manageable. So I remember this one time when I was living in Singapore, and I had to move out of one apartment where I had been living for a number of years because it got too expensive. So we had to give up that apartment, but I hadn't yet found another place to live. And so for a period of time, I was staying in different people's houses. I mean, people were offering, places for me to stay. It's not like I was living on the street, but it was somewhat inconvenient, not having, my own place. And so I remember one day feeling kind of upset about this situation, feeling sorry for myself, that I didn't have a place to live and I was having to stay in other people's apartments and move here and move there and so on. And then I caught myself thinking that way. And just around that time, there was this war going on in Europe, Bosnian War. I don't remember the details of that, but you probably remember. And so there were groups of people fighting each other and bombing each other, killing each other. And so there were lots of people who were fleeing from the violence, leaving their homes and just walking, not even having a vehicle, but just walking with their families and as much of their belongings that they could carry, and just trying to get away from the violence and try to get to a safe place. They were going to other villages and maybe staying with relatives, or some of them were maybe in refugee camps. So seeing the images of these people on the television and hearing about their stories. So I thought, well, I have nothing to complain about compared with those people. Nobody's trying to kill me. There's no war going on here in Singapore, and I'm, worried about my life in danger. So I'm actually quite well off. I do have places to stay, and I have food to eat, and everyone's treating me really well. So thinking in that way, I realized, I shouldn't feel unhappy. I shouldn't complain about my situation compared with the situation of so many other people. It was quite good. So that's, one example of how we can look at our situation in such a way that we realize, well, there may be problems, but it's not 100% bad. There's some good things about the situation. And there are people who have much worse problems than what I'm going through. And so, my problem isn't that bad. My situation isn't that bad. And thinking in this way too also helps us get in touch with the suffering of those other people and have compassion for them. So we're in a better position to understand what they are going through, how difficult it is for them. And so that helps us to increase our compassion and our altruism and our wish to benefit others. So I do think this idea of resilience, how to increase our resilience, is definitely there in the Buddhist teachings, in the teachings on Lojong and also patience. And then the second of the 4 keys is having a positive outlook. And that means seeing the good in people, being able to see that everyone has some good in them, and also in situations, being able to see the good in situations. So some people have a natural ability to do that. It just comes naturally to them. They're naturally kind of positive and optimistic. But for those of us who don't have it naturally, again, there are methods in Buddhism we can use that help us to have a better outlook. So, for example, in the teachings on how to overcome anger and how to have more patience, there's some of the advice is to look at a person, like if you're angry at another person, to try to contemplate that this person is not 100% bad. Nobody's 100% bad. Everybody has some good qualities. So if we can see good qualities in a person that we feel angry at or irritated by, then that can help us to decrease our anger. So that's a way of training our mind to see good qualities in every person. And also working on the 4 measurable thoughts of equanimity and loving kindness, compassion, and joy. So when we're practicing those, we're also thinking about other people and other beings and how they're basically not that different from me, because deep down in their mind and their heart, they just want to be happy and they don't want to suffer. And if they are suffering, then it's probably because they have disturbing emotions, delusions in their mind. that they don't have any control over. So these delusions are coming up in their mind and making their mind all disturbed. And so it doesn't make sense to be angry and hateful towards them, and instead feel compassion for them. And understand they probably have no control over their mind, and they probably don't know how to manage their mind. So these delusions, these disturbing attitudes come up, and then they're carried away by them and suffering as a result of that. And so that can help us to have more patience and more forgiveness towards them, just as we hope that people will have patience and forgiveness towards us when we, get afflicted by delusions and make mistakes. And just, I think in general, the Buddhist outlook, the Buddhist perspective is very positive, even though the Buddha talked a lot about suffering and the causes of suffering. We do need to recognize those. But he also talked about how it's possible to be free of suffering. Suffering and its causes are not permanent. They're not going to exist forever. It is possible to overcome them, to become free from them. And this is something everybody can do. So we have this term Buddha nature. Every being has Buddha nature, meaning they all have the potential to become a Buddha. That means free of all suffering, free of all the causes of suffering, like delusions, afflictions, and so on. So everyone is able to do that. Nobody is going to remain deluded and miserable and confused and negative forever and ever and ever. Everyone has the ability to emerge from that kind of situation and even become fully enlightened, just like the Buddha. So that's very much a part of Buddha's teaching. So getting familiar with that idea is very helpful to have a more positive outlook on other people and other beings. Then the third of the 4 keys, I talked about this one last week, is called attention. So attention means keeping our mind focused on what we are doing. And of course, this is something we should try to do when we're meditating, when we practice meditation, or we're doing prayers, reciting sutras and mantras and so on. We try to keep our attention on what we're doing and not distracted thinking about other things. So attention is something we practice while we're meditating, but also at other times, for example, when we're at work, or we're talking to people, listening to teachings, Dharma teachings, and so on. So we should also try to keep our attention on what we are doing and not distracted. And I was thinking about how, since the pandemic, many Dharma teachings, probably most Dharma teachings, are offered online rather than live. And so it's quite a different situation. People are sitting at home, listening to the Dharma teachings rather than sitting in a Buddhist center, in a meditation hall, and so on. And so I think it's easier to get distracted when you're at home than if you're in the Dharma center, because there's more possibilities to, let our attention wander. You might have your phone next to you, and so you're kind of checking your phone if there's any messages coming in, or because you're already online, you might be kind of surfing the net, looking at the news, or maybe doing some shopping. So the temptation is there. The possibility is there. You probably couldn't do it if you're sitting in Amitabha Buddhist Center meditation hall, with all these people around you. But when you're at home, if you're not so disciplined, then this the temptation is there, so it's possible to do. Yeah, so you probably heard that in the Lamrim, in the teachings on the path to enlightenment, kind of towards the beginning of the Lamrim, it explains the proper way of listening to the teachings, to the Dharma, and what kind of attitudes to have and what kind of attitudes not to have. And so there's this one explanation about how we should be free of 3 faults that are explained using the analogy of a vessel, like a jar or a jug or something that could hold water or other liquids. And so one possibility is if the vessel is upside down. So if the vessel is turned upside down, then nothing can go in at all. You try to pour something in, but it'll just run out all over the place. So that's analogous to not paying attention. So if we're listening to Dharma teachings, but we're not really paying attention to what the teacher is saying, because we're thinking about something else, or we're looking at our phone or surfing the net or whatever, falling asleep, then nothing goes in. We just completely miss what the teacher is saying. So we should try to avoid being like that, being like an upside down vessel. And then another one is a leaky vessel. So if we have let's say a clay pot and it's got a hole in the bottom, a big crack in the bottom. So whatever you put into it will not stay, it will leak out the bottom. And so that's analogous to a leaky mind that doesn't remember what we learn. So yeah, we have this expression in English, going in one ear and out the other. It's a very good expression. We do hear something is going in, but then it goes out again. It doesn't stay in our mind. We can't remember afterwards what was said. And so we should try to avoid that. We can always write, write notes, keep notes, or just try to really pay attention and remember what we learn. And then the third attitude is like being a dirty vessel. So if you have a vessel like a clay pot and it's filthy inside, whatever you put into it will get polluted, will get contaminated, unfit to eat, unfit to drink. And so that can happen if our mind has negative attitudes, for example, pride, arrogance, being critical. So if we have those kind of attitudes in our mind, then we might be having, being critical of the teacher, being critical of what we hear, not really listening with an open mind, but we already have fixed ideas in our mind, and maybe we even think we know more than the teacher, we know better than the teacher, and so we can kind of point out their faults and mistakes and just be critical. So those are some examples of being like a dirty vessel, a mind that having a state of mind that's not really open, positive, and pure, but is kind of tainted with unhealthy attitudes. So anyway, it is important to try to listen to Dharma teachings with a state of mind that is attentive, paying attention, able to remember what we learn, and having positive attitudes rather than negative ones. And the reason it's so important to pay attention is because the Dharma is really precious. It's like some kind of amazing medicine that will cure our suffering and the causes of suffering. The disturbing emotions in our mind, the delusions in our mind. So Dharma is like the antidote to those. And so we should really pay attention and value the Dharma teachings and try to retain what we've learned as much as we can. So otherwise, if we do have the chance to listen to the Dharma, but we don't listen properly, don't make good use of what we learn, then it's quite sad. Like the waste of a precious opportunity. We might even be creating the causes to be separated from the Dharma in the future. So we need to have an attitude that really values the Dharma and treats it with respect, treats it well in order to meet the Dharma again in the future. So with regard to attention, how to have good attention, Buddhism has a lot of methods for helping us with that. For example, mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, which there's different ways of practicing mindfulness, but probably the most common, well-known way is on the breath, just practicing paying attention to the breath, coming back to the breath when the mind wanders away. And just doing that really helps your mind to calm down. And then you can see more clearly what is going on in your mind. And also calm abiding, teachings on calm abiding or shamatha. That's how to develop single-pointed concentration. So again, you can use the breath as an object for that, or you can use an image of the Buddha. But anyway, there's a lot of advice, a lot of methods in Buddhist teachings on how to increase our attention. So now the fourth of the four keys to well-being is generosity. Generosity. So Richard Davidson says, studies show that when individuals engage in generous and altruistic behavior, they activate brain circuits that foster well-being. Human beings come into the world with innate basic goodness. When we engage in practices that are designed to cultivate kindness and compassion, we are not creating something new. We are recognizing, strengthening, and nurturing qualities that were there from the outset. So this is very much what Buddhist teachings say, that every living being has innate good qualities, innate compassion and loving kindness and so on. So even a newborn baby already has those qualities within them. But it's also important for those qualities to be nurtured. So most babies, I think, do receive a lot of love, kindness, compassion, care from their parents and everyone else. And so that love that they receive will help them to learn how to love, how to have compassion, how to care. Unfortunately, it does happen sometimes that some children do not receive loving care as they're growing up, and this can be quite damaging to them, especially when they get older. They might start engaging in criminal activities, committing crimes, or get addicted to drugs or alcohol, or they may have psychological problems. So it seems quite clear that we human beings do need love and care and nurturing in order for ourselves to be healthy, not just physically healthy, but also mentally and emotionally healthy, and be able to give love to others, to fulfill our human potential to be a loving and caring person ourselves. And then again, in Buddhist teachings, there's a lot of methods, many methods we can use to cultivate our compassion, our love, or those kind of qualities, and generosity. So generosity is just kind of a natural expression of compassion and love. In the teachings on the 6 perfections, it's taught that there are 3 kinds of generosity, sometimes 4 kinds. So there's the usual generosity of giving material things. whatever is needed by others: food, clothes, medicine, money. Okay, so sharing our material goods with others, that's one kind of generosity. Another kind of generosity is giving fearlessness, and that is when there's a person or a being in danger of being harmed or even being killed, and we can step in and rescue them, save their life. So that's also a kind of generosity, giving life. And it can also apply to if a person is frightened, if a person is, psychologically distressed, frightened, and just really needs help. Maybe they're traumatized or they're anxious or depressed or whatever, and they just really need help. And if we can step in and talk to them and comfort them and just do whatever we can to relieve this situation they're in, feeling anxious and feeling depressed. So that's also a kind of generosity, giving protection from fear. And then third type of generosity is giving Dharma. And that, there's different ways of doing that. One is actually teaching Dharma. If you have studied, ideally we study Dharma, we know Dharma, so that we can explain it to other people, because we want to make sure we're not passing on misinformation. We want to teach the correct Dharma. So that's why it's important to study. But even if you haven't studied that much, or maybe you just don't feel comfortable teaching Dharma, there's other ways of giving Dharma, such as helping people make connection with Dharma. We have to do this skillfully. It's not that we should push people, force people to learn Dharma. That's not the Buddhist way. We don't kind of drag people unwillingly into a Dharma talk. So people need to have interest from their side. But yeah, if someone does have interest, you can bring them to a Dharma talk, or give them a Dharma book, or a Dharma CD, or so many different ways of learning Dharma. So if you help a person to learn the Dharma, make connection with the Dharma, it's also a way of giving Dharma. And also a very popular thing in Singapore is sponsoring the publication of Dharma books. So making these books available, publishing them, and then putting them in places where people can pick them up, like in Buddhist centers and temples and vegetarian restaurants and so on. When I was in Singapore, there was a group of people at Amitabha Buddhist Center who were very active in doing that. And it was very helpful. But also another way of practicing giving Dharma is when we are reciting prayers or mantras, we can imagine that there are other beings. We can even imagine all sentient beings are sitting around us and hearing these words of the sutras and the mantras and so on. We're planting Dharma seeds in their minds. So you don't have to be a teacher to give Dharma. Even if you're not an actual Dharma teacher, you can still give Dharma in these other ways. And then, so those are the main three types of giving or generosity. And then there's a fourth type, which is sometimes mentioned, but not always, and that's giving love, which I find very beautiful. And that just means being loving, acting in a loving way to others. It doesn't have to be done in a really extreme way, going around and hugging people, but just smiling and being friendly and warm and being attentive. If people look like they're lost or they need help with something, then offering to help them. And just having in our heart this feeling of love for others and wishing them to be happy. and doing what we can to make them happy. So that's also a kind of giving, kind of generosity. Yeah, so Western scientists have done research on things like compassion and kindness and so on, and find that, yeah, there's actual evidence that doing those things, acting in those ways, is good for us. There are these hormones. One is called endorphins, and another is called oxytocin. I don't know much about those, but this is what I've heard. So there are these hormones that are, there's more of those hormones in our body when we do acts of kindness and compassion and help, like volunteer work and so on, doing things helpful to others, or just acts of kindness to others. And then there's actually actual scientific physiological proof that we feel better, we feel happier. And also it's good for our health, our physical health, and being able to live long. And yeah, so there's a lot of benefits that we will experience. We ourselves will experience these benefits from being more kind and helpful to others. But of course, other people benefit. The people who are the recipients of our kindness and our generosity, they will benefit as well. So it's good for everybody. Okay, so that's just a little bit about those 4 keys to well-being. And I think if we make effort at practicing, even if we can't do all 4, even if only 1 or 2, we'll probably find that we're happier and healthier and have more peace of mind. And again, in Buddhism, there's lots of methods that can help us. So there's one more thing that I would like to talk about that's, I think, very important for peace of mind, and that is ethics. Ethics, sometimes called morality. So according to Buddhism, the meaning of ethics, or the definition of ethics, it's a quality of mind that restrains or protects us from committing negative, non-virtuous actions with our body, with our speech, with our mind. It's the meaning of ethics. So it's refraining from non-virtue. So it's an attitude, it's a state of mind that cares about our behavior, rather than being careless and reckless and thinking, oh, I can just do whatever I want, it doesn't matter. Instead of having that kind of attitude, it's a very caring attitude, very concerned about how I behave, what I do with my body, with my speech, with my mind. It's an attitude of feeling, I want to do what's right and what's good and what's helpful. And I want to avoid doing things that are wrong, that are negative, and that are harmful. So it's that kind of state of mind or attitude. And then with that attitude, we try the best we can to live in accordance with those values. We try to avoid doing harmful things. We try to do helpful things as much as we can. So I say try because we have to realize we are not perfect. We are not Buddhas. If we were Buddhas, we wouldn't have to study Dharma and practice Dharma. We'd be there already. So we are not Buddhas. So as long as we're not Buddhas, we're just ordinary beings. That means we still have faults, we still have delusions, we still make mistakes. And so we need to have an attitude of patience with ourselves, patience and kindness and forgiveness. because it does sometimes happen. I know for myself and many other people that when we do, even though we try really hard to not do anything wrong, anything non-virtuous, but sometimes we can't avoid it. We do something wrong, and then we feel a lot of guilt and self-criticalness, self-hatred, and all these unpleasant states of mind. And so it is important to have the wish to live ethically, and really try our best to live ethically, but at the same time have kindness and compassion, patience, and forgiveness towards ourselves when we do make mistakes. And there's also this practice of purification. So when we do make a mistake, we do something non-virtuous, we break one of our precepts, we get angry. It's not the end of the world. We can do purification practice. So how can we develop that kind of an attitude that wants to live ethically and avoid doing non-virtuous things? So probably the starting point is when we hear about karma. That's usually explained pretty early in our Dharma education. And so karma teaches us that all the actions we do will bring results in the future that we ourselves will have to experience. So we are creating our own future experiences by the actions that we do now. And if we do non-virtuous, harmful, unethical actions, we're going to suffer. We ourselves will suffer. It's like throwing a boomerang out into space, and then it comes back and hits us. So the karmic boomerang will come back and be the cause of suffering. It's not that there's somebody out there who's punishing us for negative actions we've done. It's just the natural result of our own actions. Similar to what happens if we eat unhealthy food. If we eat some food that's contaminated or poisoned, right? And it goes into our body, and then we'll get sick, get really sick and have to go to the hospital. So it's not that somebody is punishing us for eating that food. It's just the natural result of that type of food when it's within our body, how it affects our body. So with karma, it's not a physical thing, it's a mental thing. It's mainly our mind that creates karma. And when we do something non-virtuous, like we get angry and we do something harmful to another person or another being, so just the natural outcome, the natural effect of that way of thinking and that way of acting will set up the causes to experience suffering and problem in the future. It's just the natural outflow of our own actions rather than somebody punishing us from the outside. So it's important to understand karma, to really study karma and understand karma. But when we do understand karma and we believe in karma, then that will motivate us to want to refrain from non-virtuous actions, because we're going to suffer. We don't want to suffer. So if we don't want to suffer, we have to avoid doing the things that will make us suffer. So that's kind of the starting point of the practice of ethics. But also another factor is compassion. When we meditate on compassion, we contemplate that other people and other beings are basically just like me, just like oneself. They don't want to suffer. Nobody wants to suffer. And so why should I do things that make suffering for another person or another being? I wouldn't want those things to be done to me. So the golden rule is a very helpful way to live ethically. don't do to others what you wouldn't want them to do to you. Yeah, there's a certain amount of compassion in there. But it just makes sense. It's just kind of logical, reasonable. Also, if we do hurt others, then there's a good chance that they'll be angry and want to come back and hurt us. So we might get some immediate result of our non-virtuous action. It's also good to contemplate the benefits of practicing ethics and the shortcomings of not practicing ethics, sort of the pros and cons. So this is explained in the Lam Rim. Okay, so if I do practice ethics, what will I get for it? What will be the result? So the teachings say, we'll be happier in this lifetime, just here and now we'll be happier. And so this is something we can check for ourselves. When we are living ethically, we are behaving ourselves, we're not doing harmful things, negative things. And also, if you ever have the experience of taking the 8 precepts, the 8 Mahayana precepts on certain days, and so on that day, you're particularly mindful of your behavior, not doing anything negative, breaking your precepts. How do you feel? Internally, psychologically, emotionally, how do you feel on those days when you are paying careful attention to your behavior, refraining from non-virtuous things? I don't know about you, but I always feel really good. I feel just good about myself, and I feel kind of clean, clear. Mama Yeshe used to say, just kind of pure, like the way you feel after you've taken a shower, all just nice and clean. So it's just like psychologically clean and clear and pure. So that way we can see for ourselves the benefits of ethics. But then future life, and the real benefit comes in our future lives. If we are refraining from non-virtue and creating virtue, then we'll have benefits in our future lives. Good rebirths and happiness, good experiences. But also, a real goal in the Buddhist path is to attain higher states like nirvana, enlightenment. So to be able to attain those states, we have to have good ethics. We can't be careless and reckless and just do any old negative action we feel like and expect to become enlightened. That's impossible. So if we want to achieve those goals like the Buddha himself achieved and taught, we have to have good ethics. And then on the other hand, if we don't have good ethics, if we disregard ethics and just do whatever we feel like doing, even non-virtuous actions, then there will be suffering and problems in this life. And you can just try to remember how you felt when you did do something negative. And you said, I don't care, I'm just going to do this. I want to do it. I feel like doing it. And you do it. So then what's the result of that? How do you feel about yourself? Do you really feel good about yourself? Or do you feel kind of unclear, confused, unhappy, guilty, not satisfied with yourself? Again, it's not that we should beat ourselves up when we make a mistake, we do something negative. We can purify that. Just to recognize that, yeah, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel good to engage in non-virtue. But then that's just talking about the immediate effect. But then the long-term effect in future lives will be suffering and problems as a result of negative actions. And then it's like we're creating obstacles to attain higher states of mind and eventually liberation and enlightenment. So I think it's good to contemplate these points and look at the pros and cons. What happens if I have good ethics? What happens if I don't have good ethics? Hopefully we will come to see the value of ethics, from our own side. We'll want to live ethically. And then how we can practice ethics. The starting point, as I said, is refraining from non-virtuous karma, like the 10 non-virtuous actions mentioned in the Lamrim. Well, they were taught by the Buddha. 10 non-virtuous actions like killing, stealing, and so forth. So that's a good starting point. And also we can take precepts. Precepts are vows. So this is very much a part of Buddhist practice. Like monks and nuns take a number of vows, lots of vows. But lay people can take vows as well. And there's the 5 precepts. And you don't even have to take all 5. You can take 1 or 2 or 3, however many. But taking precepts is a very powerful way of living ethically and creating virtue. Because it's said that if you take the precept, let's just say one precept, the first precept, to not kill. So if you take that precept and make that promise to the Buddha that you are not going to kill, it becomes part of your mind. The precept of not killing becomes part of your mind. And it's said that continuously virtue is being created, even when you're asleep, even when you're distracted. Having made that promise, having taken that precept, then there's continuous virtue being created. And that virtue is the cause of happiness and good experiences, good rebirths in the future, and so on. So that's another very helpful way of keeping ethics. And then there's the 8 Mahayana precepts. That's also something you can practice. You can do that on days. It's usually done on the full moon day, the new moon day, certain days of the month, the lunar calendar. When doing Nyungne, see there's a Nyungne coming up, being offered online, so you can stay at home and do the Nyungne. No, what's the word? No limit on how many people can do it. Like if it's done in the center, there's a certain limit how many people can do it, because you need a lot of room for people to prostrate and so on. But now with online, it's probably no limit. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I thought, yeah. So you can just stay at home and do the Nyungne, and then that involves taking that 8 Mahayana precepts. So it's a very beautiful practice to do. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about ethics because that's a very important way of having peace in mind. Because if you don't take care of your ethics, if you just are very careless about the things that you do, and then you engage in unwholesome, non-virtuous actions, it's very difficult to feel really peaceful when that's going on. There's going to be these unpleasant feelings. You don't feel really good about yourself. There's probably some anxiety and what kind of karma am I creating and what's going to happen to me as a result of that. So hard to have peace of mind if you don't take care of your ethics. On the other hand, if you are very careful about your ethics, living ethically and being very committed to refraining from non-virtue, then that itself is a way of having peace in your mind. So maybe I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Right now there's actually one question. Yeah. From Whelan. She asked, I would like to seek Venerable's advice on how to prevent flash of anger. Sometimes in my work or life that I get triggered because I know the other party purposely did not want to do his work properly. Before I can start focusing on our breath and control the anger, I already lash out at the other party. How to control this?
How to control the anger so that you don't speak out, lash out.
Yeah. Before she can even start, control the breath, breathing, and all. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess to be able to get to that point where you can control your tongue. We have this expression in English, hold your tongue. Hold your tongue, not let your mouth make those words, speak those words. You probably need quite a bit of practice. So this is why it's recommended that we learn the antidotes to anger, meditate on the antidotes to anger while we're in our meditation situation, sitting at home quietly, and get familiar, make ourselves familiar with the antidotes to anger and with the reasons why it's not helpful to be angry. Just get really, really familiar with those things. And so that when we do find ourselves in that kind of situation where, somebody's doing something or not doing something that they should be doing, and our anger is just exploding, our mind will be familiar enough with the antidotes to anger and the reasons why it's not a good idea to be angry, that we'll be able to stop ourselves from acting it out. So you don't wait until you're in that kind of situation and then start preparing yourself to deal with anger, because that kind of situation is too difficult. So yeah. But then when we do have an incident like that, where we're not able to stop ourselves from acting out the anger, we do act it out, then after that, it's good to go back home, or go to the meditation center or wherever, and review that situation in your mind. Contemplate, why did I behave that way? Why did I not hold my tongue, and so on. So go back and review that situation, that incident, and then think about, what could I do next time if I find myself in another situation like this? What could I do differently to avoid acting out my anger? So try to prepare yourself mentally for that situation. And that's easy if it's the same person, many, many times, frequently you encounter that person in that situation, and, anger comes up in your mind, then you can really think carefully about, how can I avoid it? What can I do to avoid showing my anger, acting out my anger? It does take time. I mean, don't expect that just having heard about the antidotes for anger once or twice, and maybe just having thought about them once or twice, that will be enough for you to be able to put them into practice in actual situations like that. It really takes a long time to familiarize ourselves with the antidotes to anger and get to the point where, even in a situation like that, we can stop ourselves from acting it out. But even if we can't stop ourselves from acting it out, then there's the practice of purification. We can do 4 powers of purification to purify our unwholesome actions of body and speech and mind and so on. So try not to feel bad and hopeless and despair and things like that if you can't stop yourself from acting out your anger. I'm living in a monastery, and here, there's many people who have taken vows, monastic vows, and really trying hard to live ethically and not get angry and so on and so forth. But it does happen even here. People get angry and speak an angry word, get into arguments. There's no physical violence, but sometimes people do speak angrily to each other. But they work it out. So that's very nice to see that, one point in time, those people are kind of speaking angrily at each other, but after a while, they're friends again. So, yeah, I'm just saying this to show that it does take time, and it's not easy to learn these new habits of not acting out our anger. But when we do have those kind of incidents, that itself is a good lesson. That gives us an opportunity to see, oh, I still have anger. I still have that problem. I have to work on that. And that will give us and hopefully the motivation to work harder, to study more, to meditate more, to practice more, to get to the point where we, can act in a different way rather than just lashing out with anger. So I hope that is helpful. And I can see another question in the chat box.
Yes. Regarding the precept of not killing, how to prevent killing lizards and ants in our kitchen. No matter how clean we keep our kitchen, these things still come into our kitchen from outside. How to deal with this pest?
Yeah, this is always a big problem in Singapore. So many creatures. Well, lizards, I don't see. I mean, I used to have lizards living in my apartment, and didn't feel any need to kill them. They usually just. I just remembering when I lived in this apartment on Rideout Road, kind of in a jungly area, lots of trees around, and yeah, there were lots of lizards. What do they call geckos? Geckos. Those lizards that live behind the pictures and behind the cupboards, and then they come out. And, and there was one, whenever I was preparing lunch and I was grating carrots to put into the salad, and the grated carrots would kind of spill all over on the counter. And there was one lizard who would live under the toaster. There was a space under the toaster. And he seemed to always know when it was time to, when I was making my salad, he'd kind of sneak out and grab a piece of carrot and then run back under the toaster. So yeah, I remember having a lizard in my kitchen, but I never thought of killing him. He wasn't causing any problems. But ants is another thing that's really difficult because they can run so fast and be all over the place. So I remember having big problems with ants. I didn't want to kill them because sometimes they're just running all over the floor, and you can't even walk on the floor without stepping on them. So yeah, I'm trying to remember too, when I was living in Israel, not a couple of years ago, and there had a lot of ants coming in to the house from the outside. And so what I found was certain types of oils, like citronella oil and peppermint oil. I went online. I Googled how to get rid of ants without killing them. And so there's lots of information on there that you can find, different kinds of products that are not toxic, they're not harmful, but they just keep the ants out. So I use that to stop, these natural oils, like they have them in insect repellent as well. So I would just spray that across the door, the front of the door, and then they wouldn't come in. And also, if you can find holes, if there were holes in your cupboards or in your floor or whatever, and that's where they're coming in, then you can cover up those holes with something so that they cannot come in. So there are things you can do to keep out these creatures without having to kill them. And like I say, if you go online and Google, how to get rid of ants, how to get rid of geckos or whatever without killing them. It is doable. It is possible. Here in Sravasti Abbey, we have problems with mice in the meditation hall. It's kind of an old building, and so there's probably little cracks that they get into. And one morning, this image of the Buddha, here, this one here, this image of the Buddha, this is the image in the meditation hall. So apparently one morning everybody was in the meditation hall meditating, and they looked up and there was a mouse sitting right in the Buddha's bowl. Because you can see they put some food. Those are rice cakes. They put food in the Buddha's bowl. So some mouse, little tiny mouse, went to eat some of the food. So, they don't kill the mice. They get traps. There's traps you can get to catch them without killing them. And then they just take them to some other place far away and hope they don't come back. So, there are ways of dealing with creatures without having to kill them. So I hope you find a way. And that's also important to keep things clean. That's very important as well. Don't leave food out. Have it in ant-proof containers. Make sure you wash your dishes. But yeah, I remember very well when I lived in Singapore that was one difficulty. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Yes, if there's any question, you can post in the chat, or if you prefer to ask, you can raise your hands using the function.
So if there isn't a question, there was actually one little something I wanted to read. So this is a book called The Four Foundations of Mindfulness in Plain English by Bhante Gunaratana. He's a Sri Lankan monk who has been living in the United States for many years, and wrote a number of books, especially on mindfulness. So there's this nice little story in here. This book is actually about the four foundations of mindfulness, and sometimes brings in his own experiences, his own what he has learned from doing these practices. So here he says, I walk as much as I can every day. Often I see deer that have been shot by hunters. Sometimes the hunters cannot find them, and the carcasses rot by the roadside. I also see trash thrown by the road, beer cans, liquor bottles, TV antennas, refrigerators, tables, and other household junk. I think he lives in Virginia, West Virginia. So I think it's quite a rural area. A lot of forests and farms around. So yeah, when he goes for walks, he sees all this junk that people just threw out of their cars by the side of the road and turning rotten. So then he says, because I desire to see a clean environment, these sights sometimes disturb my mind. But then mindfulness intervenes. I remind myself that desire does me more harm than good. Even the wholesome wish for people to stop hunting or to dispose properly of their trash unsettles my mind and causes me to suffer. So instead of being attached to my environmental principles, I remind myself that I cannot fix the whole world and let go of my desire. I may not be able to remove the world's greed, but I can get rid of my own. The moment I do, I begin to relax. Then and there, I experience peace. So I found that quite nice to read, because I also get disturbed by other people's habits. Like around here, we also live in a rural area, and there are lots of people who go hunting. And I haven't actually seen them hunting, but we can hear their guns, usually in the late afternoon. You hear these guns going off. And I just find that sounds really disturbing. And I hope they missed. I hope, because we do have deer. There's a lot of beautiful deer living around here. And it's just heartbreaking to think of them being shot. So I just hope that they didn't manage to kill one of the deer. But I also feel disturbed. Like, why do people have to do that? I wish they would stop doing that. So I like Bhante Gunaratana, I can see that kind of thought is disturbing to my mind. I cannot change them. I cannot go and say, stop hunting. They're not going to listen. So we do what we can to change others, to change the world, but we also have to accept that we cannot change everybody and make everybody everywhere in the world the way we want them to be. And if we have this strong desire, the strong attachment for things to be different, then that just creates disturbance in the mind. It just makes the mind disturbed and unhappy. So I felt what he said was very good, that it's better to let go of our desire and our attachment for people to be the way we want them to be. And then there's peace in the mind. So I see another question. Yeah, there's some advice about dealing with ants. And then there's a question from Gyokchin regarding the precept on lying. Lies, no matter what color, is bad, but is withholding information considered bad, knowing that the truth will hurt the other person? How do we deal with it? No. If you withhold information that you think would be hurtful, cause hurt, cause harm, that is not lying. Because there's this example that's often given in the teachings. Again, talking about deer and hunters. They say if you're taking a walk in the woods, you're walking in the woods and you see a deer running in a certain direction. And then, after a few minutes, a hunter comes along with a gun and says, "Did you see the deer?" Now, what are you going to do in that situation? Are you going to tell the truth? Are you going to say, "Yes, I saw the deer. It went that way"? So if you're really strict about truth and lies and you think, "I have to tell the truth, I cannot lie," then the result might be that the hunter will kill the deer. And that means the deer will get killed, which will be very tragic. But also the hunter is creating bad karma. The hunter manages to kill the deer, he's creating bad karma. So that's a case where telling the truth would lead to suffering, both for the deer and for the hunter. And so they say, in that kind of situation, we have to use our wisdom. And you don't have to tell the truth. You don't have to tell an absolute lie. You could find some other way around it. You could just say, tell a joke. "Hey, did you hear the one about the..." Or distract the person, somehow. Or just look in a certain direction, like, "Oh, you don't have to say the deer went that way." That would be a lie. But you can find some other way of avoiding telling the absolute truth out of compassion, both for the hunter and the deer. So that's an example of withholding information in a situation where telling the truth would hurt. And And I remember this one man, once when I was teaching, this man came to me and he said, my girlfriend asks me, am I pretty? And if I tell her the truth, she'll be very hurt. So what should I do? Yeah. So I said, well, maybe you can say something like, oh, you are beautiful. But you're thinking not so much physical beauty, because maybe it sounds like maybe she's not really beautiful. But you can think emotional beauty, internal beauty, inner beauty. You can be thinking of that in your mind when you say, you are beautiful. So that's not a complete lie. So yeah, the point is we do need to be skillful. And of course, yes, we do need to tell the truth as much as possible. But on the other hand, when there's situations like that where telling the truth could lead to suffering, could lead to hurt for somebody, I don't think we feel obliged to tell the absolute truth, but try to find a way that isn't a complete lie. That's my understanding. And yeah, you don't have to give all the information to everybody. Yeah. Let's see again. Yeah, if you know certain material or certain information, and somebody might ask you for that information, but if you feel that it wouldn't be useful for them to know, you shouldn't feel obliged to give all the information. You can give some of it and maybe say, well, some of this information is classified or something. Yeah. So we need to use our wisdom. We need to balance wisdom and compassion and being truthful. But every situation is different. So there's no sort of black and white rules about this is what you should say in this situation. Okay, so we've come to the end of our time. Now we will dedicate. I hope these talks have been helpful for you, and I hope that you will continue to practice and use some of these methods, these techniques to keep your mind peaceful, happy, positive, calm as much as possible. So let's conclude by making a dedication, dedicating the merit, the positive energy of spending this time together, listening and thinking about generating some positive thoughts and positive questions about it. So we've created some merit, good energy, positive potential. So now let's make a mental dedication of this merit with other beings, wishing all living beings could find genuine peace and happiness, freedom from suffering and its causes, and eventually, ultimately, reach full enlightenment Buddhahood. And we can also dedicate for the long lives of our spiritual teachers, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Mizopo Rinpoche, Ken Rinpoche Geshe Chuni, and all other teachers everywhere who are teaching the Dharma, the true path to liberation from suffering and to full enlightenment. So may those teachers live very long and healthy lives, and may all their activities be successful. Okay.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the wonderful teachings. So can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm not too sure whether you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, because just now there was a technical glitch, so I think I exited, come back in. So thank you very much, for for all these teachings, and it's really, I think it is really helpful for us to focus on the certain areas and all that. And it's really wonderful that in 4 teachings, I think you basically taught the whole stages of that to enlightenment. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, almost. Yeah, thank you. So we really hope that there will be more opportunity for us to invite you to teach again at ABC. Yeah, so now with the Zoom is even more convenient. Yeah, we don't have to travel. Yeah, so, and it's so good to see you, healthy and all that. And we really thank Shawasti, Abby as well, for for this opportunity and all that. Yeah, thank you very much, Rabbi. And with that, maybe I'll unmute everyone. Let's see. As usual, I take a while to unmute people. Yes, suddenly sometimes I forget how to unmute. Ask all to unmute. Yes, that's right.
Thank you,
Okay.
Baba.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice
Finally, we
Merry
got
Christmas
Thank you.
and a good year. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Good night.
Bye. Take care.
Take care.
Yeah, everyone.
Take care. Keep warm.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See you again soon.
Very well.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.